Guess what, everybody? The Super Mario Galaxy movie trailer has finally came up today, so woohoo! Which I'll talk more about that until tomorrow, but I digress. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only, Silver the Hedgehog here, and once again, I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Mario Luigi, Superstar Saga, aka for those of you who live in Japan, Mario Luigi RPG for the Game Boy Advance. So, last time, we somehow basically did manage to explore some more parts of Seabed to potentially try to chase after that particular Beanstar piece, and as a result, we did somehow manage to able to get into the yellow pipe, which as a result, well, before that, on the other hand, we also did manage to battle against some more enemy encounters, such as for instance, Mecha Blooper and Star Kiss, and on top of that, Cheep as well. And not to mention though, is about the fact that as a result, we have to do the ridiculous amount of swimming, just because, you know, we're in underwater basically. And so much to the point, we also did manage to went into the next location, which appears to be Gawarara Lagoon. So as a result, it's almost like a tropical beach setting, similar to the forms of how it does it in Ohu Ruins. So as a result, yeah, you can get the idea for this point. So because of that, and along the way, we also did manage to able to enhance our hand power to potentially not only trying to learn ourselves the Fire Bros, but also Thunder Bros attacks this time around. And on top of that, we could also able to learn some of these specific abilities, such as Fire Dash and the Thunder Sidewalk, or anything else like that, or something like that. So because of that, despite the fact that it's been quite a while since I actually have last played this game for sure, for about a couple of hours, plus the reason why is because, well, there's a lot going on in this point. So because of that, yeah, today for this video is that, speaking of which, we are still about to be exploring into the forms of Gawarara Lagoon, to potentially, speaking of, trying to able to make our way to hopefully trying to get ourselves the first piece of the Beanstar itself. So because of that, yeah, with that being said though, there's a lot to talk about this for the sake of time, folks. Is that first of all, is about the fact that, as you probably already know, today's date, of course, there is the 12th of November today, in some cases in 2025 today. And first of all, I just want to say, for those of you who lived in the UK version, well, happy 15th anniversary of the game's release of Sonic Colors within both Nintendo Wii and Nintendo DS version as well. So to be more specifically, that in a Wii version plays very similar to Sonic Unleashed daytime stages, but usually has some huge emphasis on 2D sections, and as a result, yeah, I'll get into more details about that in a second. And as for the DS version, it's like a successor to Sonic Rush basically, with the exact same sprites, and on top of all that stuff though, despite there's no trick system anymore, so because of that though, you pretty much get the idea, since in last year, thanks to I would say Tiana or I did the actual Let's Play of Sonic Colors on the DS version, although I may be wrong, because let me tell you, it's been a year ago since we've last played Sonic Colors on the DS to able to finally get a chance to catch up with the rest of the Sonic games basically. So because of that, so apart from the fact that we still got a couple of Sonic DS games left, and so we're essentially pretty much done when it comes to the forms of DS Sonic games on that particular Let's Plays department. So because of that, now straight to the point though, is about the fact that let's talk about the forms of how the fact it's been 15 years since Sonic Colors did originally came out, both on Wii and DS. I still found it to be a very enjoyable experience, although I will have to admit though right away that the Wii version is, you know, the best version to me though, and so much to the point, for the fact that despite the story is a bit cheesy nowadays, especially it's almost more accurately dedicated towards children this time around, in terms of writing and humor, which I totally get that. So no matter what though, that I do know that Sonic did actually tell me about this back then, that he found the story to be very enjoyable, but now, 15 years later, the opinions have started to change a little bit for the sake of the forms of how cheesy some of these lines were, especially noticeable that was actually the introduction to that line, which appears to be Baldy McNose here, to able to actually signifies Dr. Eggman to be more specifically. Not to mention though is that some people found the DS version to be very enjoyable, especially because not only because the phones they plays very similar to Sonic Rush, but on top of that, the special stages was actually in the DS version, and then also to top of all that stuff though, we were able to encounter Sonic's other friends on the DS version, like for instance, we were able to actually have Cream and Cheese the Chow, and not to mention though, there was also myself, Silver, and Blaze especially, and there's also Knuckles and Rouge, and the rest of the Chaotix group, like, you know, Vector, Espio, and Charmy B, and even Shadow the Hedgehog, and E123 Omega, and not to mention though, Amy, and Big the Cat. So as a result, yeah, no wonder why that most people seem to prefer DS version a little bit, although despite the fact that the level design is actually a little bit more challenging compared to the phones of how it does on the Wii version, because I don't know about you, while looking back on the Wii version's difficulty when it comes to level design, I found this to be a piece of cake in comparison to the phones of the DS version, because sometimes, you know, with the phones of Asteroid Coaster, it gets a little bit nerve-wracking difficulty spike. So because of that though, filled to the brim with a lot of, you know, instant death moments, and don't even get me started with the Fonslow side missions, specifically the time limit missions, and not only that though, trying to able to actually kill a certain amount of enemies in a certain amount of time, and even trying to go for these different numbers in between. So with the phones of the very clunky Void Wisp, I will must admit though right away, although don't get me wrong, the introduction of those different kinds of wisps, depending on what version of the game you're playing, either on the Wii version and the DS version, they are still very unique, but as a result, for the fact that no wonder why, that the wisps themselves are starting to get a lot more recognizable when it comes to certain Sonic franchises, well, ever since likely for about, well, 15 years span. So because of that though, yeah, I got nothing else to add. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. What was your favorite memories in terms of experiencing Sonic Colors within either on the Wii or the DS version? For me though, I obviously attempt able to remember the Wii version a little bit more, but that's mainly because no matter what though, is that after all, that the remastered version, specifically Sonic Colors Ultimate, did already came out since likely roughly about 4 years ago now. So no matter what though, despite there are some technical issues with the forms of not only the user interface, but in addition to that though, well, it did manage to came out during the forms of in a pandemic year, specifically 2021, so no matter what though, sometimes the actual development might take a bit like, well, it's hard for me to explain, but I digress. So speaking of Sonic the Hedgehog though, I actually did manage to discover some exciting news to talk about. Well, first of all, recently though, I've recently gone back into Pac-Man World 2 Repack, specifically the Switch 1 version and the PS4 version, and the reason why? Because recently though, the first DLC pack for its collaboration pack for Pac-Man World 2 has recently came out today for Pac-Man World 2 Repack, which appears to be the Sonic the Hedgehog collaboration. And what if I did manage to play those specific stages, specifically 3 stages in particular, for what I've noticed, that usually takes place in specifically in Green Hill Zone environment, so no surprise there. So no matter what though, I found those stages to be quite fun to explore into. I mean sure, no matter what though, is that the difficulty might throw you off at points, specifically though, with hesitation with the forms that have specific hazards to worry about, like for instance spikes, and even especially noticeable we come across into familiar badniks, such as Buzzstormers, and especially noticeable with ghosts that actually act out as egg robos from the likes of In Sky Century Zone from Sonic Generations. So, pretty interesting all things considered. So because of that, and straight to the point, yes, much like the evolves of how it does on the base game, there is actually some more missions to tackle. And for the most part, for I've managed able to play those stages, after I've realized that for the most part these missions are self-explanatory, apart from the time trial ones, which, oh boy, there's a lot to go through whenever we dive into Pac-Man World 2 Repack at some point in during the evolves of it next year for some time. Well, it's mainly because no matter what though, we should probably wait on that specific subject whenever when the rest of the entire DLC for Pac-Man World 2 Repack will be on its way until specifically next year in 2026. So because of that, now, don't get me wrong though, I do really love the actual collaboration that Pac-Man can able to actually traverse himself into the Sonic world for the very first time. Well, technically speaking, that wasn't the first time, on the other hand. That honor goes to Sonic Dash, because, that in that particular limited time event, you can able to actually try to unlock not only Pac-Man, but in addition to Miss Pac-Man as well, back in the Evolved event, let's just say in 2015 for some time ago, or should I say a very long time ago actually. So no matter what though, I wouldn't be too surprised about the fact that, well, exponentially speaking, I was about the fact that, well, I've also found out, actually, relatively speaking, that no matter what though, is about the fact that thankfully though, whenever I did manage to experience the last boss, or specifically the only boss in that particular collaboration stage, specifically Act 3, thankfully the checkpoints are very generous enough if you really want to go into the next phase, because unlike certain other bosses that is so stingy with checkpoints, which I must say though, that will be my only gripe I have with the forms of Pac-Man World 2 Repack still, when it comes to base game, because every time you screw up, and then if you think you're about to be moving on to the next phase, and then if you accidentally die at one point throughout the entire battle, the checkpoints does not trigger at all, so you have to go for the entire boss fight in one session. So because of that, I know it's incredibly frustrating, I know, but let's face it though, the difficulty is a little bit, too much for my liking. Unlike Pac-Man World Repack, I found that games be quite easy, despite with the forms of stingy checkpoint system when it comes to boss fights in particular, but as long as you were able to know the patterns very well, then you were able to actually guaranteed able to deal with all that stuff no problem, but that's besides the point. So, anywho, the next thing I want to talk about actually is that recently though, Kirby's Dream Buffet has recently been added to the Nintendo Music application, and suffice to say, that game in particular does have whopping 115 music tracks, so no matter what though, some of these tracks might be very recognizable from any other Kirby games, and some of them are only exclusive to Dream Buffet, so yeah, that's a interesting surprise there, especially considering for the fact I'm pretty sure that we still on the forms of in the, well, suffice to say though, it's been like, a year ago since when Nintendo has first introduced Nintendo Music application. Oh, and speaking of applications in general, out of nowhere, Nintendo has just revealed Nintendo Store application out of nowhere, and it's downloadable for free in order to able to actually access that particular application. And of course, yes, just like the forms of how it does it on not only Nintendo Music, but in addition to Nintendo Today application, which I rarely use most of my time, and on top of all that stuff though, just anything else Nintendo Switch in general, on eShop applications or online and stuff like that, yes, you still need to acquire an you still need to able to acquire an account in order to able to actually access to any of those specific aspects. So, not too surprising there, but regardless of such though, it is nice to able to actually have an alternate way to potentially try to able to actually access to, well, Nintendo Store. So, anyway, oh, and speaking of which, recently though, that when it comes to not only Nintendo Switch 1, but in addition to Nintendo Switch 2 as well, recently though, between those two systems combined, they've recently got into this new firmware update, which appears to be 21.0.0, and suffice to say though, they've addressed quite a number of things here and there, like for instance, the menu has been updated, and on top of that, the eShop update has been fixed, and not to mention though, easier downloads. So yeah, we'll go for these updates one by one. So, for instance though, when it comes to the forms of in, well, let's just say, for instance, though, there's also another new update, but more specifically for Pikmin 4. So, relatively speaking, Pikmin 4 is now on to version 1.1.0, and unfortunately, though, according to my friend of mine, Stuart, or CapKing74, who I've recently checked on him, he found that update to be kind of disappointing to him, but regardless of such, though, it is, something else entirely, but let's run down the list. When it comes to the forms of newly added gameplay experience for Pikmin 4, you can now choose from 3 different activity levels for creatures, such as, for instance, though, with difficulty, if I have to say so. Like, for instance, though, there's Relaxed, Normal, or Furious. So, this means it's like Relaxed is like easy mode, Normal is basically normal, and Furious is basically hard mode. So, very similar to the forms of how it does on the difficulty system for Pikmin 3. So, well, specifically Pikmin 3 Deluxe for Nintendo Switch. So, I digress. So here's the next boss fight right here, and this guy was actually known as Hermie 3rd. So Hermie 3rd does have multiple attacks, although before we get into more details about that, here's some of these actual weak spots as you can tell. So for instance though, he does have 2 claws as to be expected, so as you can see, I'm actually going to be focusing on the claws from now on, because for claws, they do have, like, let's just say 70 HP or 40 HP, I can't really judge on that front, and as far as the main part is concerned, when it comes to Hermie 3rd, obviously though, that he does have 400 HP or 380 HP, so no matter what though, and as you can see, he managed to hide himself in a shell, and then once you're able to actually realize, he starts to heal himself. And what's also very interesting with Hermie 3rd is that obviously though, it's almost like a decorations all over the actual shell to represent a Christmas tree shell, which that's almost like a very convenient idea for the actual concept of this boss design, especially because considering for the fact that Christmas is just around the corner, so I mean, relatively speaking, we just literally got about a couple of weeks left now until Christmas is just around the corner. Specifically, 6 weeks or something like that. I can't really judge on that front, but regardless of such though, that potentially speaking sometimes though you have to dodge his claws, as you can tell, and also for the fact that you also need to able to try to attack the actual poisonous bubble that he somehow shoots, because otherwise, if you dare touch the actual purple bubble, you get a poison effect, basically. So now, I do know there's actually a strategy to able to actually try to deal with the forms of some damage while he was hiding on the shell, which appears to be utilizing the fire hand power, but unfortunately though, I haven't exactly got around onto doing that, because, relatively speaking though, because like I said before, it's been about a couple of hours since I actually have last played this game for sure, because not only did I somehow still keep on playing through Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, but in addition to that, I finally managed to go back on playing through Pac-Man World 2 Repack for that particular Sonic the Hedgehog DLC collaboration. So because of that, yeah, I did have a lot of fun with that particular DLC at the end of the day. I mean, it is kind of disappointing about the fact that there's no new voice clips between both Pac-Man and Sonic themselves, neither with Dr. Eggman especially, which I totally get it because of how the fact that obviously though, well, as far as I'm aware, that Saga is obviously going to be doing his own thing, and then meanwhile for Bandai Namco, obviously do the same thing when it comes to more accurately trying to deal whatever they wanted to. But even then, I just really wish that they'll added in some unique voice clips within Sonic and Pac-Man together, and not to mention though with Dr. Eggman too. So, oh well, no big deal though, beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. So, yeah, with that being said, this boss is relatively, easy when you get the hang of it though. I mean, sometimes though, for the fact that you always have to rely on to the fact that we have to make sure that we have to able to actually keep on using ourselves the Chopper Bros, and even especially noticeable with Knockback Bros as well. So that way it deals so much damage to the forms of Hermie 3rd. So yeah, that's actually pretty swell, and that pretty much does it for Hermie 3rd. So logically though, we can now able to actually claim ourselves the first piece of the Beanstar itself. Because as far as I'm aware, once we get the forms of the other 3 pieces, well, 2 of them in particular is going to be super duper quick, whilst the 4th and final one, well, we'll get into more details about that if we're able to actually keep on exploring around the Bean Kingdom in general. So because of that, now, in regards to the forms of how much experience points you're about to be getting, if you do manage to defeat Hermie 3rd, you obviously get about 450 or 600 experience points, and as far as coins are concerned, you can get either 80 or 200 to be exact. But I suppose it really doesn't matter, because here's our first piece of the Beanstar, so only 3 more to go. So logically though, is that for the most part, when it comes to doing that particular main quest, it's going to be self-explanatory. So no matter what though, as I said before, we're now on to the halfway point in terms of the entire game already. I mean sure, no matter what though, there's going to be still some of those side quests that we have to specifically try to deal with for the sake of time, just to ensure for the fact that we can easily try to able to get these side quests down before we're able to actually move along to the story progression and during at some point until later. Now, apart from the fact that there's one specific side quest I might have to discuss on that front. Well, do you guys even remember for the fact that back in Paper Mario that Maxie obviously attempts to do the cooking parts for last just before he decides to tackle for the final boss in Paper Mario? Well, I get the gut feeling for the fact that before you're able to actually tackle through the final battle in this game specifically, I might not do that just yet, because aside from all that stuff though, yeah, we'll discuss more about that during a later time. Specifically tomorrow, or anything else to be more specifically. So yeah, I believe for the most part we are essentially basically done in this particular location from now on. I mean, sure, there is still more to come, which yeah, we'll be back for this place eventually. So for now, let's go ahead and save our game. So yeah, we're now on to level 34 for Mario and Luigi. So that's very top notch so far, in regards to the forms of trying to grind as many of those level ups as we possibly could. So that way we could become like overpowered and everything. So you probably get the gist of it. So at least thankfully the green war pipe is actually not too far from that particular proceedings for this point. So but yeah, the next thing I want to talk about this is though, and that, ladies and gentlemen, we somehow about to be getting not one, but 3 new free DLC characters are definitely going to be coming to Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. So before we mention about that, we somehow also confirmed the actual release date for the SpongeBob SquarePants DLC collaboration between, you know, the Paddy Wagon cards, and in addition to that, with SpongeBob and Patrick star as playable characters. So no matter what though, they have already been confirmed the actual release date for it, and it's about to due out at some point on next week at this point, specifically 19th of November, so that's roughly a day before Kirby Air Riders for Nintendo Switch 2 will be releasing during that time. So because of that, yeah, I'm very curious to know how that track actually plays out to be. I mean, sure, no matter what though, it has been a couple of days since I actually have last played Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, just because, you know, I've been busy playing for some more Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, just in case I can able to try to complete the game before I'm able to actually move along to the next Switch 2 game I'm looking forward to checking out, like, you know, Kirby Air Riders, and alongside with that, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and most importantly, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Switch 2 Edition, just because if I dare manage able to try and play for that game on Switch 1, not only for the fact that the fans might blow extremely hard on my Switch 1, but it's also about the fact that, well, when it comes to likely trying to deal with the singular Joy-Cons for, you know, Nintendo Switch 1, it might be felt a bit slightly, it's hard for me to explain, but even then though, I'm sure enough that we'll discuss more about that particular game once the actual game finally comes out and during at some point in the next couple of weeks. So, but I digress. So, yeah, with that being said, the next 3 free DLC racers are definitely going to be coming. And surprisingly enough though, I'm actually really looking forward to, well, one of them we technically already know, thanks to the back of the box art of Sonic Racing Cross Worlds physical version, which, for the most part, the next free DLC we're about to be expecting to get, it's Nights, from the likes of Nights into Dreams, which is pretty awesome in my book, especially because it's been a very, very, very long time since Sega finally acknowledged Nights himself. So because of that, yeah, as for Nights himself, obviously though, he's going to be coming until at December this year, specifically next month at this point. So we're not entirely sure when exactly, but I'm sure we'll find out more about it. And next up we have is Ai from Super Monkey Ball, specifically Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble, because of its redesign. So as far as I'm aware, he's going to be coming until specifically 2 months time, within at the very beginning in 2026, in January 2026. I'm guessing the reason why they somehow choose Ai in that particular date, or specifically on that release schedule, in January 2026, not only for the fact that that particular year for 2026 will mark the 35th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog, but also celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Super Monkey Ball franchise since 2001. So I guess that makes a little bit more sense to be able to actually release on that specific schedule. So yeah, that's actually pretty awesome. And what's even more cool to me though is that we're almost about to be guaranteed to get every single playable characters based off from Sonic Riders from the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox release, including PC as well, because in that game also has Sega guest characters such as Ai and of course Knights and also Ulala from Space Channel 5. So I can imagine if they were trying to bring Ulala into Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, that way it should complete the entire roster in regards to the forms based off from Sonic Riders, aside from, you know, E10000 Green and E10000 Green and Red, as far as I can definitely tell. So no matter what though, I highly doubt if E10000 Red and Green will make a comeback though, which as a result though, because no matter what though, that, well, it's hard for me to explain, but I digress. And I can imagine about the fact that they're also trying to bring Amigo, specifically based off from the most recent entry in the series, some of the Amigo Party Central design. So I can imagine about the fact that Amigo will be up next, entering at some point during the forms of it next year. Or even, they might try to bring Billy Hatcher from the likes of Billy Hatcher and a Giant Egg, if it's anything else possible. I mean, time will definitely tell though, because, surprisingly enough, not only we're about to be getting one, but two other races as well, when it comes to free DLC updates for Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. And surprisingly enough, two of them are coming from the Sonic comics, which appears to be Tangle the Lemur and Whisper the Wolf. So as a result, that's actually really awesome, especially that we finally get a chance to play those two characters specifically in a kart racing game, or specifically extreme gear racing game. So because of that, that's actually very awesome in my book. Especially I can imagine that Sonic fans will be super duper hyped and also super duper excited about this as well, just because, well, it is pretty cool that we're about to be getting even more Sonic Universe's repetition, or to be more specifically, representative moments, such as, for instance, as I mentioned this before, both of those characters in particular are originated from the Sonic comics and stuff like that, which is really, really awesome. So, and suffice to say though, those two in particular combined will be coming and doing at some point in February next year. So because of that, I can imagine that came out in the exact same time as in the Switch 2 edition of Sonic Racing Cross Worlds will be releasing during that time. I mean, we shall wait and see, because even then though, because suffice to say, I'm very happy about the forms of how the character roster for Sonic Racing Cross Worlds just keeps on getting better and better and better, and even better for that matter, because even then, it is super duper awesome to see not only Ai again when it comes to experiencing the Sonic Racing game again since Sonic and All-Stars Racing transformed, and same applies with Knights itself too. So because of that, because unlike Sonic Free Riders, for some stupid reason, for the fact that they somehow refuse to bring back the Sega guest characters, which is a little bit baffling in my book, especially because of all that. No wonder why Xbox 360 Connect sucks. So, but that's just me. So, and also, speaking of which, when it comes to SpongeBob SquarePants in general, that it's been 20 years ago since that particular episode did somehow first aired, which appears to be, have you seen this snail? And no matter what though, it's about the fact I also am assuming, for that matter, that this is perhaps one of the most saddest SpongeBob episodes ever, for some people out there. And no matter what though, I've also realized that while looking back on it though, it did state for the fact that 20 years ago today, or specifically the past couple of days ago, the iconic SpongeBob SquarePants special, Have You Seen This Snail?, premiered in Nickelodeon, and this special was watched by 8 million viewers, and it was without a doubt the highest rated programs of all TV among children for the year of 2005. So yeah, time flies, as be expected. Although despite the fact that it's almost come to a point where it almost goes into its full decline when it comes to the forms of how good SpongeBob used to be, which I totally get it for the fact that it's even not so crazy for the fact that we're getting yet another movie coming up at some point in next month, so that's besides the point. So, Oh, and on top of all that stuff though, we just got about 2 more days to go until Dragon Ball Sparking Zero for Switch 1 and Switch 2 is going to be releasing. So because of that, yeah, I'm super looking forward to that, despite the fact that, well, unfortunately though, I have no choice but able to go after the physical version and during at some point in this year's Christmas, by the way, so... Because for the most part though, I'm essentially basically done ordering things for the sake of the films of this year so far in 2025. I mean, for the most part though, we've come a long way when it comes to pre-ordering stuff for 2025, ranging from some films in particular, and also order some interesting items for 2025, which I'll get into more details about that if we dive into other aspects in particular, because as you can see, we've actually come across into this particular syncing puzzle right there, which means you have to able to try to do that, as you can see, in order able to, you know, hit these little estimation blocks at the same time within Mario and Luigi if you're trying to able to do some bit of separation slightly. So because of that, and it's also worth knowing for too, is about the fact that if you manage to able to let Mario go onto the higher ledge while Luigi just somehow thinks he was trying to able to, like, well, it's hard for me to explain, because even then, thankfully, I managed to solve this, no problem. So, and then once you successfully trying to pull this off, then you should able to actually guarantee to get yourselves a nice little gear accessory by the forms of the wool trousers. So, yeah, pretty nice, all things considered. So, now in terms of the forms of wool trousers, as far as I'm aware, thankfully though, you get yourselves HP Ultra Grand, so this means about the fact that every time you go into a battle, basically though, your HP will be increased slightly every time when it's your turn or something like that. So yeah, pretty useful accessory, or gear for that matter, if you decide able to go for that, so... But anyway, oh, and speaking of which, I also did somehow found out recently that, did you guys know, it's been 10 years ago since one of those particular video games that somehow came out, not only on PlayStation 4, but in addition to Xbox 360, Xbox One, Wii U, and Nintendo 3DS especially. There's a game called Snoopy's Grand Adventure. That game is now 10 years old, which is kind of surprising, considering the fact that the reason why that game exists is because of trying to able to promote the celebration for the Peanuts movie back in 2015, so I can possibly understand why that the game adaptation of it actually exists. So, but either way, and oh look, we actually come across into the next piece of the Beanstar itself, which before we enter there, on the other hand, we need to investigate around in the outskirts for a little bit, so just in case I need to double check if there are certain bits I was missing on. So yeah, come on. There's always those common enemies that always attempt to throw me off at one point, but regardless of such though, thankfully we can easily deal with them thanks to the forms of our overpowered stats and stuff like that. So yeah, everything else checks out there basically. So anywho, oh, and unfortunately though, for those of you curious enough, it's even bad enough about the fact that you know with the forms of how Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, as well as the forms of the majority of those third-party supportive games when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 is actually going to be become a game key card. It's even bad enough though is that unfortunately though, one of those Pokemon games in particular, which appears to be Pokemon Pokepedia, I think it's what it says anyway. Unfortunately though, if you're planning to get the physical version of that game, sadly to tell you, that game is a game key card release. And I'm just like, are you kidding me right now? Are you seriously gonna flip out any of those Pokemon fans right about now? I mean, it's even bad enough about the fact that despite I'm probably not gonna check that game personally though, because usually relatively speaking until next year, I'm gonna be super duper excited for you know, Mario Tennis FIFA and the Switch 2 edition for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, for the, you know, story expansion, and not to mention though, with the forms of Yoshi and a mysterious book, along with the forms of some other surprises here and there, like something relates to The Legend of Zelda, and even with Metroid, because you know, next year within both not only Sonic the Hedgehog, but in addition to Super Monkey Ball, and even especially noticeable with The Legend of Zelda and Metroid are about to be celebrating its anniversaries next year. So, you know what I'm saying for the fact that, like I mentioned about this before, Sonic is going to be celebrating its 35th anniversary, and also Super Monkey Ball is potentially trying to celebrate the 25th anniversary if it's possible. And not to mention though, when it comes to you know, The Legend of Zelda and Metroid especially, they are both going to be celebrating its 40th anniversary next year. So because of that, and by that time Enduring Phones will be in 2027, that will mark the 35th anniversary of Kirby, and and on top of that, next year is also going to be the 30th anniversary of Pokemon as well. So yeah, I'm still very curious enough what they're gonna do for celebrating its 30th anniversary of the Pokemon franchise, like, you know, bringing Generation 10 games, specifically for Nintendo Switch 2. The only thing I was a little bit worried about is that if it does mention about game keycard labeled on those upcoming Pokemon games, that will just flip out the phones those Pokemon fans out there, which either way. So as you can see, we actually got ourselves the Iron Pants, and basically though, this allows us to able to, well, if we check on the actual specific status here, the defense is actually ridiculously high, but here's the catch though, if you try to perform a jump and stuff like that, you'll be naturally going to be heavy. So because of that, I won't recommend it too much though, as long as about the fact that, well, I can sometimes manage able to sometimes ignoring, different effects when it comes to status if you do manage to equip these specific different gears and badges especially. So because of that, yeah, that's the only reward you can get if you do manage to do the final, you know, the isometric, like some sort of like platforming or anything else like that. So I digress. So it looks like we made our way to the next location, which appears to be known as Yoshi Theater, because I can definitely tell there are some Yoshi faces, icons, or faces all over the forms of flat tiles, and even especially noticeable with the actual sign too. Now, depending on what version of the game you're playing on, either the European version and the North American version, you do realize that this is the European version of the game, by the way, because as you can tell, if we somehow managed able to read any other dialogue first, you do realize that the theater's name is actually spelled a little bit differently compared to the North American version, because for instance though, theater, as far as the European versions is concerned, it did somehow say it with the forms of, let's just say, T-H-E-R-T-R-E, at least that's as far as I can recall, maybe? Well, mind you though, I can, okay, there we go, T-H-E-A-T-R-E, whilst compared to the forms of how it does in the American version, it did somehow swapped over some letters, like, you know, with E-R, so relatively speaking though, if you lived in America, it did somehow spell out as the forms of T-H-E-A-T-E-R. So yeah, you can get the idea what I was expecting for the sake of the forms that comparison within the European version and the North American version especially. So I just want to classify that. So yeah, it's remarkably similar to like before Sonic Colors, where in the European version they obviously add a U for the colors and all that stuff, whilst compared to the American version removes the U. So, and another one of those examples being favorites, that it does add a U in the European version, whilst compared to the American version, they do not include the U. So, yeah, you can get the idea with this pattern. So, anywho, now, yeah, it's kind of sucks though for the fact that one of those Pokemon games for Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be the game key cards, which is all thanks to the forms of one of those interview videos they did somehow published in, not only in Japan, but in addition to America and the UK version as well, to talk about the forms of the game key card information, which it shows us as an example being Donkey Kong Bonanza is a full-on game, so thankfully that game is not a game key card, whilst unlike the forms of how it does it on Pokemon Pokepedia, obviously though that game is unfortunately going to be a game key card, unfortunately. But regardless of such though, just showing us about the forms of what really happens if you insert the game key cards, which technically speaking, though, back in launch day, I've come across into a specific information about the game key card by complete accident, rather than just letting Nintendo obviously know about the thing at first. So, yeah, it's kind of upsetting for some Pokemon fans. But, at the same time though, the game actually reveals the actual release date for it out of nowhere too. So it's going to be launching until specifically the 5th of March in next year in 2026. So, I just love that particular Amy Radical thing right there, which is actually a reference to Yoshi's Island. So, pretty cool stuff, especially because, you know, we ended up in Yoshi Theater, so as a result, as you can see, there's actually another piece of the Beanstar. So, now if you're probably wondering, how are we supposed to get that particular piece, you're probably wondering? Well, I'll talk more further details onto that specifically until tomorrow, if there's gonna be anything else possible, especially because we've only just got there, and so much to the point, we haven't exactly checked out the actual theater yet, so, and talking of which though, when it comes to Yoshi Theater in general, that if you ever play the 3DS remake, you're able to actually see not only Yoshi Theater at the opening cutscene once you boot up the game, and on top of that, you can also come across into a bunch of Yoshis sat on the actual seats while watching the actual action while you navigate through the menus in Minion Quest, or specifically Bowser's Minions, and those posters look very fancy. So we got ourselves the familiar references like Kirby, Wario, Mario and Luigi, and a very suspicious looking character which appears to be Starfy, which, from what I can gather, when it comes to those posters either way, I really love that reference right there, because we got Kirby's story and also Wario to represent WarioWare Incorporated, and also we got Mario and Luigi, which that was the actual thing we are playing through right now, Mario Luigi Superstar Saga, and lastly, the legendary Starfy, which, as a result, yeah, it seems pretty cool to be able to have that reference there. I get the feeling that, unfortunately, the 3DS remake seems able to remove the actual specific cool detail, as far as I can recall there, so no matter what, though, it's about the fact that we'll talk to this guy right there, on the actual screen projector right there, so yeah, I guess for the time being though, as far as at this point in time, I was originally able to actually mention about the phones that particular, not only Switch 1 version 21.0.0 updates, but also save lives with Switch 2 as well. But suffice to say for this point guys, we should probably talk more about that particular subject and during at some point until tomorrow, if it's gonna be possible, so. But yeah. And it will be pretty interesting about the fact that when it comes to, like, not only the fact that, well, obviously that Knight has already experienced Extreme Gears before, since not only Sonic Riders, but in addition to Sonic Riders Zero Gravity as well, because, you know, he was actually a flying type, and meanwhile when it comes to II, he also experienced Extreme Gears already since Sonic Riders. So, and no matter what though, as far as the go-karting is concerned, obviously though II has already experienced go-karting before, since, you know, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, and Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, so yeah, it's kind of weird about the fact that Mimi was not playable in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds either, so maybe if it's anything else a possibility that, well, I can't really judge on that front, because obviously though, that I'm extremely happy about the character roster in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds right about now. I mean, what's next then? Maybe they'll try to bring in Sticks to Badger next, for the sake of the forms of maybe potentially trying to revive the Sonic Boom franchise. Well, I highly doubt it, but that's mainly because, well, despite in Sonic Frontiers, that Amy did somehow reference, or should I say mentioned, Sticks to Badger in Sonic Frontiers within, not only the base game, but in addition to the Final Horizon 3 DLC update, by the way. But, yeah, I wasn't able to actually get ahead of myself at this point just yet, because obviously though, for the fact that we just literally got a bunch of new stuff. Oh, and final thing I want to talk about, yes, the Nintendo Direct, the Super Mario Galaxy Movie Direct has already came up, and no matter what though, again, I'll talk more about that until tomorrow, because I was originally though, decided able to actually go for a reaction video of that. But here's the catch though, unfortunately though, Universal is pretty much stricted when it comes to trying to let me do the reaction videos like this, you know? Especially because if I was planning to do a movie trailers and all that stuff though, when it comes to reacting on that stuff, well, sometimes though, copyright was a thing, so that's pretty stingy. But regardless of such though, suffice to say though, we should probably end things off this point right here. So join me next time for some more of Let's Play of Mario Luigi Superstar Saga for the Game Boy Advance. Is that potentially speaking of, we need to make our way back to the Falls of Bean outskirts to look for the bean berries to be able to recover most of these Yoshis. So that's our part of the plan. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.